Hello everyone, my name is Jared Gingras. I'm an analyst with Real Story Group, and today I want to thank you for joining us for the DAM Diagnostic webinar. Do you really need a digital asset management system? I'll be moderating this session with, basically what I'll do is I'll collect your questions throughout this session and feed them to our main presenter today, our principal digital asset management analyst, Teresa Regley. That's one way you can participate. The other way you can participate is on Twitter. We'll be having a back channel conversation using the hashtag RSGWebinar. That's RSGWebinar. Feel free to express your comments on there, and we can have another conversation going as this webinar commences. The other thing that I'm sure some of you will be wondering about is will these slides be available? And the answer is yes. In the next day or so, we will send you all a follow-up email with the location of these webinar slides. The full recordings will be available to our Real Story Group subscribers, and we'll make those known as soon as that's available as well. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call on the numbers on our website, or feel free to email us. Teresa's email is on the screen, or you can email info@realstorygroup.com as well. So without further ado, let's get to the presentation with the principal of the Real Story Group, Teresa Regley.
Hi there. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you on the West Coast. We did time this webinar specifically for people in North America, so thanks to all of you for joining me this afternoon. And I had decided to specifically do this webinar and call it the DAM Diagnostic, or the Digital Asset Management Diagnostic, because a lot of people ask me about the differences between a digital asset management system and other sorts of content management systems. So I'm going to specifically talk about that today. And for those of you who don't know the Real Story Group, just to give you a quick introduction to who we are, we provide research and advisory services to help people make good technology and strategy decisions. So the core of our business is research-based, and we're very focused on product evaluations. We only work for end users and end buyers of these systems, so we're really out there as a buyer's advocate to help people understand what kinds of systems are really the most appropriate for them and their situation. And as Jared mentioned, I focus specifically on digital asset management technology, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so here's a quick agenda. And as Jared mentioned, he's going to take questions, so please feel free to send questions as we go, and we'll get to them all at the end, and I'll be happy to answer those questions as they come in, and we'll make sure we get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. So my agenda today is really to define what is digital asset management in the context of all the other sorts of technology that's out there that is often talked about as content technology or content management technology. And digital asset management people really like to make the distinction between DAM and other sorts of content management technologies, and I'll talk about what those types of distinctions are. So specifically, I'll talk about what's unique about DAM versus these other sorts of technologies, and I've listed 4 items here. I'm probably going to end up talking about more than 4, but these are the ones that I'll talk about the most. First is a particular focus on metadata that you find with digital asset management. I'm going to talk about the diversity of ingestion, and what I mean by that is the range and types of files that digital asset management systems can manage. So I'll talk in depth about that. Then I'll talk about media processing, and this is a really fun and interesting topic about the different sorts of media that digital asset management systems can manage and handle that others cannot. And then finally, I'm going to talk about types of workflow, because the types of workflow that you can manage within a digital asset management system is also quite unique. And as Jared mentioned, if you're tweeting, please use the hashtag RSGWebinar, and he'll also get questions off of that. Okay, so what is digital asset management? It's always important to define exactly what something is. There's really 2 things you can define. There's the art of digital asset management, or the discipline of digital asset management, There's also digital asset management systems, so I'm going to define those separately. First of all, in terms of what a digital asset management is as a discipline, it's really the management of digital media throughout its lifetime. So content technologies in general manage different sorts of assets, right, or different sorts of content. There's web content management systems that manage web content. There's document management systems that manage documents. Digital asset management is very focused on what many people call rich media. It's very focused on things that are non-textual. So photos, graphics, audio files, video clips, maybe flash animations, banner ads, brochures. So maybe there's text within these assets, but principally they are about imagery, video, things that are not inherently textual. And so I have a couple pictures here where I have a picture of England, I have a picture of the map of England, I have a picture of the London Bridge. Actually, sorry, that's the Tower Bridge, I should be more specific, which is in London. These are images that are very difficult for a piece of technology to understand, to know necessarily what they're about or what they're of. So this is where metadata comes in, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. But really, digital asset management is about managing these sorts of assets, things that software can't read, things that software cannot necessarily distinguish from one or the other. To define digital assets more specifically, we at the Real Story Group often talk about the differences among different sorts of files. So there's rich media, there's assets, and there's electronic files. And very specifically, I like to say that a digital asset is a file that has an intrinsic or an acquired value. Much of the rest of the content management world usually refers to content, just in general. And assets are really about turning your content into something valuable and something useful. So to put it in a little bit of a different way, digital assets are files or collections of files that are not just the media or the file itself, but it's also the metadata. And with that metadata, you in essence are able to take that file and give it some sort of intrinsic or acquired value. Because once you give it the metadata, it becomes more useful. You can actually process it in some kind of workflow. You can potentially monetize it, and you can potentially make money off of it. You can potentially use it in many, many more ways than you could if it had no metadata associated with it. So let's talk very briefly about that. So when does content become an asset? Well, it becomes an asset when it has metadata associated with it. And this is an example of that sort of situation, right? So when it comes to any sort of file or an electronic file or a piece of content, many, many systems will just take assets in or content in without having any metadata associated with it. And digital asset management is really about making sure you have those two things associated with one another. So you've got this picture of the space shuttle here, and what you see behind it is essentially that intrinsic value that you're adding to it. The name of this particular image, the creation date of this particular image, the photographer, a description, the resolution. These are all things that potentially can allow an organization to earn money off of this particular image, to use it properly, to make sure that it's only distributed in a way that is legal and that they have the rights to distribute it around. These are all very, very important aspects of managing digital assets, and the metadata is really key to that. So that's a key differentiator. In terms of a DAM system, it's a little bit different. So I talked about what digital asset management is as a discipline. I talked about what makes content into an asset, that's metadata. A digital asset management system specifically provides a repository that facilitates a bunch of different actions around an asset. So it facilitates creating assets, managing assets, organizing assets into a particular structure, into different metadata structures, for example, the production of assets, the distribution of assets, and then finally, potentially, the monetization of these media assets that are identified and put into the system. So I'm not going to get into every single aspect of this today. I'm not going to talk about everything a digital asset management system does. If you have interest in reading all the detail, that's what the purpose of our research is. We also have an online education course that goes through every single aspect of a DAM system. I'm just going to focus today on a few aspects that are really different about digital asset management versus versus everything else, so that you can look at your own organization and say, well, we probably need that, or maybe we don't. So I mentioned within the enterprise content management world, so the much broader world of content management, there's a lot of these different technologies, right? There's technologies that manage websites, there's technologies that manage product data, web pages, HTML very specifically, records, etc. So digital asset management is really a very, very small part of this. All of these systems have similarities, and this is why I've chosen to focus on the differentiators today rather than those similarities. But every single one basically essentially has some sort of repository, essentially has some sort of editorial workflow, essentially has business rules around how these different assets should be managed. The DAM system is unique in that it's, again, focused on those imagery assets. And most of these other systems have no capacity to manage video or audio or a time-based sort of asset, right? Where you might, for instance, need to be able to take a clip or a still from a video and turn it into an image. Very, very different, unique technology in a DAM along those lines. The different markets that we cover, actually DAM is probably the smallest, among the smallest of all the markets that we cover at Real Story Group. You know, the ECM market, my colleague Alan Pell-Sharp covers the ECM market, which is very focused on document management, record management. That market is huge, and many people will say, well, can I manage my media files within my existing document management system? And the reality is, well, sort of, if you just want to manage them like they're files. But if you want to do some very rich sorts of things with those files, if you want to be able to store all of your Flash documents and be able to push them to a website in a different format, or you might need to transcode, I'm going to talk about what that is in a minute, you might need to transcode different sorts of formats on the fly. Your typical document management system is simply not going to do that for you. SharePoint is not going to do that for you. So that's where this niche comes in terms of digital asset management. It's a very, very specific niche. It's a very focused sorts of technology, and there's a little bit of overlap with what a WCM system does or what an ECM system does. There's really only a little bit, and it's not the majority of the functionality that overlaps. Digital asset management vendors really come from 3 different areas, and this is where we start to get into those very specific differences in functionality from other sorts of content management systems. They come out of desktop publishing, which is sort of, it's essentially developing brochureware, right? So if you're in a marketing group, for example, in a large organization, or if you're an ad agency and you have to create a lot of collateral for your clients, you might have used a digital asset management system, and you might need a digital asset management system. You know, web content management systems, for example, are not designed to create print output. They're just not. Whereas many of the digital asset management vendors come from print backgrounds, and in fact the technology was designed to output to print formats. Either a small print format such as a brochure, or a large-scale sort of format such as a newspaper, a magazine, a catalog. And this is where technologies that creative users are very used to working in, like Photoshop, InDesign, Quark, these integrate very well with digital asset management systems. And that's a whole different sort of flavor of DAM that exists as well, that other sorts of content management systems generally don't integrate with, and also don't really output to these large-scale print formats. And then finally, the last sort of route for DAM is around video or time-based assets in general. So some of this might be sound files if you are a radio broadcaster or some kind of other audio-based broadcaster. The typical DAM systems in this area, they integrate very well with editing suites like an Avid or an Apple Final Cut Pro, so that video producers can then manage completed or even in process or in progress assets within the system. So if you're in one of these sorts of scenarios, you probably do need some sort of digital asset management system because an existing document management system or a web content management system isn't really designed to output to brochures, large-scale sorts of printing scenarios, and they're definitely not designed for any sort of high-end video or audio management. To talk a bit about scenarios where I typically have our customer base, the buyers of our research, and also the people who ask me to help them with consulting, tend to come from these sorts of different backgrounds. And if you specifically are in one of these situations and you feel like you don't have well-organized assets, then you might need a digital asset management system. So one is probably the most common sort of customer we have is around brand management. So people who have a lot of logos to manage and have brand assets to manage and have to output to multiple channels generally look to digital asset management to help them do that, and digital asset management systems to do that. Collateral, so this is really a branch in many cases of brand management where you're reusing imagery across different locations, across different channels, formats, etc. So this sort of example, one of our customers is IKEA. That's a very good example of a large worldwide global company that has many images of their products that need to be used all over the world in catalogs and brochures, etc. That's an example of managing that sort of information. Archival management. Museums are one of the biggest users of digital asset management systems, for example. If you work for a large organization that's been around for a long time, like Coca-Cola, you might have a long time, or a long, I should say, backlog of different images that you need to manage from an archival perspective. That's a typical scenario. Media asset management and broadcast. We're seeing more and more of these sorts of customers buying our research and asking us about consulting as well, because there's so much media being developed more and more, even by organizations who aren't necessarily in the media business. They're starting to create video. They're starting to use video on their websites. And web content management systems aren't necessarily very robust or really good at managing these sorts of web content, video assets or media assets. So we're seeing more of that as well on the digital asset management side. And then agency automation. So if you work for a large advertising agency, a lot of agencies are looking into DAM right now in terms of better managing their client assets. And then also you might have a very large global enterprise that needs to manage assets across multiple borders, multiple languages. These are all the most typical scenarios we see. So if you find yourself in one of these sort of situations and you don't have a solid system in place to manage your assets yet, you probably will need it in the near future. What we do in our research is we rate 25 different digital asset management vendors based on these typical scenarios, right? And it's very interesting because in terms of assessing what you might need, you probably don't just fit into one of these scenarios. So recently, I'm currently going through a product selection with a broadcaster based in New York, and we actually picked 3 scenarios of these 13 that made a lot of sense in terms of what they needed to do. They were doing basic brand management. They were also producing marketing collateral, so they had market asset production and distribution, and then they're also doing short-form video production, which is all the way down the bottom. So those are 3 very different sorts of scenarios they fit into. But what you find as you assess where you fit and what sort of scenario you might be in is that different vendors have different levels of experience in these different sorts of scenarios. So you have to be careful when you're deciding what you need and when you're looking at what you need to understand where you fit and make sure you're going towards the vendors that really know what they're doing in these sorts of different scenarios. And we, of course, rate all the vendors in our research based on how well they do here. So I'm going to then talk about, as I mentioned, specific aspects of digital asset management that I think are the most unique to DAM among the large gamut of content management technology in general that exists. So let's talk about ingestion, media processing, transformation and transcoding, monetization and rights management, and I'm trying to think if and distribution. So I have 5 different areas here, really. And I highlight these specifically because, as I mentioned, I could go through every single aspect of what a DAM system does here, but the ones that I haven't circled, you find these characteristics generally in other sorts of content management systems. So if you have a document management system or a WCM system, you're going to find characteristics of storage management and organization and localization and search and navigation, etc. All these different things. So I've really chosen to focus on what makes DAM different and unique. And again, if you have interest in all of these aspects of how the system works, we have the online half-day training course that you can participate in. So first, talking about ingestion, this is always a fun word, and I often say digital asset management systems are omnivores, right? So it's like in the food world, you know, we have vegetarians, we have vegans, we have people who like meat, we have pescatarians, people who eat fish but not meat, and there are all kinds of different sorts of things that people choose to eat. And content management systems are sort of very similar in that regard. Some sorts of content management systems just manage HTML files, and other sorts of content management systems manage electronic documents, maybe in 15 different formats, but not in 15 other sorts of formats. Digital asset management systems have an extremely broad range of what they ingest and what they will manage. And that's one of the most unique things about them. So ingestion in general talks about what kinds of files are supported, how are those files uploaded, copied, moved, if they're in some other location, or if they're going to stay in another location, how are they referenced, and what kind of processing can happen as they're ingested. So one of the things that's very useful in a digital asset management system is you can say, I have all these Windows media files, and I want to transfer them all to Flash as I ingest them into my DAM. And that's something that a typical DAM system will do for you. You can also do it on the other way out, right? So if you have all of your video assets stored in Flash, but you want to output them to the iPad, obviously that's not going to happen if they're in Flash. So you can do them you can have them transformed on the way out. So you can say, okay, this is going to go to the iPad. It has to be in a different format. It has to be in QuickTime so that people can watch it on the iPad. So that's one of the things that's really unique about digital asset management systems. And if you, in particular, have that sort of need where you've got a whole bunch of assets in one format and you very frequently need to transform them in the case of an image or transcode them in the case of a video or audio asset, you can do that with a DAM. And if that's typical to your situation, or if you'd like to be able to do that, that's a scenario where you'll want to look at digital asset management. These are some key ingestion considerations. What kinds of file types are supported? Are you going to copy files? You're going to move them? Do you want to do bulk upload? So for a lot of our customers who are adopting new systems, it's a matter of they already have 10,000 assets somewhere on a shared drive usually, and they want to be able to upload them all at once. You have to look for something with that sort of capacity. Can they handle compound files? So this is another thing that is unique to DAM that I could also talk about probably for half an hour, but won't have time to today. But this is where, for example, if you put a Quark file or an InDesign file into your digital asset management system, it'll actually parse out all of the sub-elements of that particular file. So if you have images in there, if you have logos in there, captions, whatever it might be, it will take those images within and it'll manage those as separate assets. Video ingestion, I've talked about that a little bit. Metadata extraction, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And there's other factors here that you can consider as well. XMP is worth talking about in this context as well, because this is something that is a very important standard within digital asset management that really only digital asset management geeks tend to talk about at length. It doesn't tend to come up a lot externally to DAM, but fortunately it is more and more. And this is a standard whereby you can embed metadata directly within files. And this is very useful because as things get ingested into a digital asset management system, the system will basically take that XMP metadata and manage it either separately in some sort of repository, or in the case of some systems, it will simply keep that metadata embedded in the file, and so if that file ever gets exported, the metadata stays with it and continues to stay with it. So that's a very useful thing in case you happen to be managing something that ends up in another system. So this is exceptionally useful, and I really think that digital asset management treats XMP very, very sacredly, so to speak, in the sense that the metadata focus really helps with the emphasis on better use of XMP and better use of this particular standard. Media processing. This is something that if you need to process media, this is something that's very much DAM oriented. So you don't find other types of content technologies that really process media. So I already used the example of you're storing a whole bunch of files in Flash, and you want to people on the iPad to be able to read those files. You're going to need to transcode them. You're going to need to process that media. So media processing can take on a number of different forms, and different vendors do different sorts of processing, right? So this is where you can change, transform, transcode, extract, and this can be extremely useful for all sorts of organizations as more and more companies that have really nothing to do with broadcast as a business are producing their own video. And I'm going to show a couple examples of this shortly. One of the things you need to think about is what are the different things you need to do to video, right? So do you need to render it in different ways? Render meaning if you have them in Flash and you want them in a different format, what are those different formats that you might want to put it in? Metadata extraction. How are you going to extract metadata from these files? And then are there third-party processing tools that you're using? So I mentioned Avid, I mentioned the Mac tools that exist to do this sort of thing. You'll want to make sure that your tool integrates with those things. Now I'm just going to show a couple of videos, and I'm sure that there'll be a little bit of a lag as I show this, but when it comes to media processing, it's really better to see than talk about it. So here's an example of an image that's being stored in a high-resolution format in Telescope. Telescope is a tool sold by a vendor called North Plains. Now, what you're seeing here is someone zooming in on the detail of this fox's eye. And when it comes to processing media in a DAM, part of what you need to decide is, well, what level of resolution am I going to store this thing at, right? Generally, a best practice with digital asset management is I'm going to store the highest possible resolution of this video, image, whatever it is, so that I can do this sort of zooming in on them. And if I'm a creative user, I want to be able to look very, very closely at a high resolution image and be able to maybe take a piece of it, right? What you're seeing here is a close-up of a tapestry, right? So you probably saw it was a very, very narrow strip, and then it's been zoomed in on so that the artist can see an extensive level of detail here. Now, this is a great idea in principle, but it requires a lot of storage space, right, because you're storing extremely high resolution images in general. And if you want to download these images, it takes a lot of time. Part of the advantage of what you have with a digital asset management system is if you're storing this high resolution, you can choose, okay, I'm going to download a web-ready version. I'm going to download a lower resolution version, for example. And that's the sort of thing that a digital asset management system will allow you to do. You can store just the high-res version. You only download low-res optimized versions, for example, and it will do that transformation of the asset as it comes out of the system, and it's not storing duplicates. It's not storing all this extra files on in your repository, but it still is storing one very large high-resolution version. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. Media can also be structured, and this is part of, if you're thinking about digital asset management, if one of your problems is that you have a whole bunch of videos and maybe you just want to use pieces of videos at a given time, or you want to take a video, a still from that video and just use one image from it as an example, this is where you can actually use a DAM to, in fact, structure your video. So if you put it in a DAM, it will essentially it'll create a storyboard, and it'll put breaks in different scenes. Some of these tools that are more advanced can actually do scene detection, where it can see when the scene has a major sort of visual change. and it'll splice it into bits for you essentially, so that if you go in and you just want this 30-second clip, you can even specify what 30 seconds you want and take that clip out of it. This is not the kind of thing that you're going to do with your typical document management system, for example. This is a very specific DAM-based scenario, and this is the kind of thing that you potentially will need in your organization. This is where DAM would come in. I'm going to show another video now. This is an example from a vendor named Adam, which is a digital asset management vendor based in Belgium. The one I showed previously is based this is traditional asset management. More companies three-dimensional object potentially just have to put on three. A video example that's going to have some sound, so I'm not going to I want you to listen and see. This example is from Autonomy, and it shows management of a video asset with transcription of text.
All 13 controllers, give me a go, no-go for launch.
You know that Easter vacation trip we had planned for Acapulco?
Procedures, go, control, go flat.
There might be a slight change in destination. Maybe say the moon.
And everyone back on Earth, Pleasant evening.
We got a wicked shimmy up here.
It's got to be instrumentation. Great, we're going to skip right out of the atmosphere. We're never going to get back.
But we're looking at less than 15 minutes.
Yeah, that can't happen. It's got the atmosphere. We're never going to get back.
But we don't have that much time.
So there was a whole bunch of things that happened there with that video, and really it looked very impressive, and it does look very impressive, but it's much more complicated than it looks. Okay, so what was happening there is that the video gets ingested, and what the technology does is a voice-to-text transcription, essentially, and it's definitely not foolproof, right? So if you have a very clear voice in the video, for example, if you're talking about Patrick Stewart or somebody who talks and articulates very clearly, you're going to have a very good voice-to-text transcription in that regard. However, it generally takes a long time for technologies to really be able to adapt to different voices and to be able to transcribe with that level of accuracy. And the other thing you saw there was actually some facial recognition. So you can basically teach the technology, here's what this person looks like. So in that case, it was Tom Hanks, and they were able to mouse over the name and then identify Tom Hanks throughout the video, so that if you needed to go through and find, and find that face or find a brand logo or whatever you wanted it to find, you can essentially train the software over time to do that. That's probably one of the most advanced things that a DAM system can do right now. But I would just use all those caveats. You can't just ingest all your videos and have it work as well as that example did. But it gives you an idea of very unique functionality to DAM. And this is all part of short-form video production, as I'm also showing here, another example from Telescope, whereby you ingest videos, it does scenes, it's doing a voice-to-text transcription that largely will have to be corrected over time until it learns the voices, and then also doing this scene splicing, where specifically you can even add metadata for particular segments. So you can assign unique metadata to those segments as well as to the video as a whole. Again, this is all very unique to digital asset management, and if this is the kind of thing that you need to do or would like to do later, you can absolutely be thinking about how DAM might be able to help you to do it. Okay, now I'm going to talk briefly about workflow. And workflow is something that is basically every content management system in one way or another has some level of workflow management. Some of it is very poor in the sense that it basically just has somebody create something and someone approves it, and that's it. So that's sort of your most basic level of workflow. It's just a two-step workflow. Digital asset management systems tend to be catered towards creative workflows. I already talked a bit about how somebody who's working with Photoshop or Illustrator can be able to access a digital asset management system directly from those applications. And that's the sort of thing that is very unique within a digital asset management workflow. So potentially somebody who just simply doesn't want to log into a web browser can open up a digital asset management repository, open up a high-resolution version of an asset, and then work on that asset and check it back into the system without ever having to log on via a web browser or some other client. And that's a huge advantage. So you've got the art director maybe over here, or even a product marketing manager, able to interact with assets within their native clients, and that's a very appealing sort of thing, and it's also very unique to digital asset management as well. You also see a lot of multimedia workflows within digital asset management, and that's something else that's very unique. So if you have, even if you're doing things on the web that are very media-oriented, such as an interactive movie calendar or different sorts of video scenarios where you're doing a whole catalog of videos, what have you, this is the sort of thing that digital asset management is very commonly being integrated with web content management in order to manage that presentation of video and rich assets on the web. In this case, the web content management system might actually be interfacing with the repository for the DAM and saying, okay, I'm pulling out a low-res version of this video, or I'm pulling out a flash version of this video, and that gets eventually pushed to a web server, right? So that you're still only storing that one version of the video, and yet it's being presented on the web in the proper format, the proper format, so that it can be downloaded at a good speed. So that's the sort of thing where you see these complex workflows where oftentimes a DAM is handling part of it, but it's also tying into the workflow from some other system as well, because you've got a very intricate sort of business process that has to take place. And I just consider multimedia workflows very unique to DAM because it allows you to do a lot more in terms of editing and splicing video even within the system than other content management systems might let you do. Okay. A few things to beware about, and I'm just about wrapping up here. I'll be able to take some questions. In terms of the workflows, what I have here is just different sorts of workflows and whether or not they tend to be supported. So I talked a bit about a serial workflow. That's where someone creates something and then someone approves it, and then maybe it gets deployed in one way or another. It could be to print, it could be pushing it out to a web server, whatever. Most systems actually only support that sort of linear workflow. And if you have the sort of workflows that need to go to multiple people simultaneously, much like the last slide I showed, where maybe there's 3 or 4 different people working on an asset simultaneously, that can be very complex, and it often isn't offered as part of these systems. You might need, in fact, a third-party business process management software to do that. So workflow is a complex challenge, and if you have particularly complex workflows, don't expect that a digital asset management system, or really any kind of content management system, is necessarily going to be able to manage every aspect of that. A lot of that is human discipline, and you just have to be careful that to not think that the technology is going to be the panacea. So finally, I'll talk about transform, transcode, and deliver, and I've pretty much covered transforming and transcoding already. So this is where transform is the term specifically used to refer to transforming an image. So you have a high-resolution image and you want a JPEG, and that's basically being able to change that format on the fly when you need it via a DAM system. Transcode refers to the video. And then delivery, I touched on a little bit as well, but just to summarize, that's really unique to DAM. Because of the history that DAM vendors specifically have with other formats. Web content management vendors, for example, are really geared towards outputting web pages and managing HTML files. In this case, digital asset management is geared towards many different types of print formats and just all kinds of different outputs that many other types of content management are. Since we're a little short on time, I'm going to cut through some of these details here. This is just an example of image transformation in this case. So this is from Google. You can see documents just you've all heard see this here. What you do in this case is you have to transform it as you as the system. Make sure you have one version, and you can decide how to change the resolution, change the format, change, you know, 50 degrees away. This gives you the option to be able to do that without having a designer, for example. I see this being especially useful as constantly have a designer to be available to make changes change resolution or format. The whole metadata piece. You need to have the metadata around that for it to really work properly. So again, we're getting a little short on time here, so I'm just going to show this slide here. This just is an example of looking at the IP rights around a particular asset and defining those IP rights. Again, goes back to the importance of metadata in this particular scenario. And I'm going to summarize there with that because I know we're just about out of time. We have a lot more information on rights and IP management. If you have questions, I'll be happy to address that during the Q&A period since we have about 10 minutes for that. Before we get onto the Q&A period, I just wanted to briefly mention 2 upcoming conferences where I will be giving half-day seminars basically on the digital asset management market and the vendors. I'll be in Chicago in a couple of weeks on the 22nd, 23rd, and I'll be in Los Angeles in the middle of November. I believe the dates for that are the 18th, 19th, 20th of November. So if you'd like to come to a half-day seminar, please feel free to join me in Chicago or Los Angeles for that. Then you can go to damusers.com and you can even get a discount. There's the code there on the slide if you wish to attend any of our seminars in Chicago or LA. And finally, here's some information about our website, and I won't read through all that. You can read it while we're going through the Q&A, and you can write down any of those pieces of information there. And I think that's it for now. I hope that I've been able to summarize for you the key differentiators with digital asset management, and hopefully based on what I've been able to tell you about, you have a better sense of whether or not you really need a DAM system versus the technology that you already have in place. I'm happy to take questions. Looks like there's a whole bunch of them.
Thank you, Teresa. I just want to apologize to everyone. Teresa, you probably don't even realize this happened, but there was a little bit of a sound problem in the middle there. It went in and out. But so I would, I'll remind everyone that we will send you a copy of the slides, and if you do have any questions about any of the slides, Teresa's email will be included with the slides, and she'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have or clear up anything that you may have missed because of the sound quality. So again, I apologize for that. But Teresa, we do have a couple good questions in here. It's a pretty quiet crowd today. But the first one is about evaluating vendors that have both DAM and web content management capabilities. And the specific question is, what are the most important aspects in terms of integration between the two that should be considered?
Between web content management and DAM?
Yes.
Well, I mean, there's a number of factors that could be considered. I mean, first you want to ask your web content management vendor first and foremost what kinds of actual digital assets they can already handle, because honestly, there's a lot of web content management vendors that are already doing some of the more simple digital asset management tasks that I talked about. So some of them are doing very simple image management, some simple transformation tasks. So before you even get into thinking about the integration, make sure that you know what your web content management vendor can already do. Because sometimes if your needs are pretty simple, your web content management vendor might already offer some of those features. In terms of integration between, if you decide, okay, my web content management vendor definitely doesn't have the sorts of features that I need, based on some of the things that I talked about. If you're looking to do very advanced sorts of media processing, etc., you always want to ask what systems have been integrated with before. So many of the DAM and WCM vendors actually have partnerships where they've done implementations together before, or they have the same system integration partners where they've implemented the tools together in particular scenarios. So that's a very, very good thing to ask. You also might ask what kinds of assets they're used to sort of passing from one system to the other as well. So many web content management systems, the video is something that's just pointed to basically within a file, and it's sitting on a server somewhere. So you'll want to understand sort of how is that actually managed within the web page, and where is that being pulled from? Where is the video actually living, and is it going to work properly? So those sorts of things are all important. Trying to think if I can think of anything else. Those are the main things that come to mind off the top of my mind.
Great. The next question is about workflow. You talked a little bit about workflow there, and the question from our attendee is, our workflow is what I consider fairly complex. How can I be sure that the DAM vendors that I'm considering can handle my workflow?
Well, testing is always the best thing to do, to be honest. I would recommend that you put some of the detailed workflows into your RFP. If you're going to send out an RFP, you can either do an illustrative workflow where you actually have an image that describes sort of the typical life cycle of an asset, or you can actually write a use case. That's often what we advocate. So you just describe what happens to an asset, describe who creates it, what happens to it, where it goes, what kinds of interactions that asset has with various systems, and actually put that in your RFP and ask your vendors to actually tell you and show you, preferably, how that would be handled, and test it in your own environment. That's really the best thing you can possibly do is install a trial version in your own environment and actually test that asset management. I tend to find with the most complex workflows, you tend to have to hone in on what's really realistic for the DAM to manage versus versus the whole entire life cycle of an asset. So oftentimes, if you are creating high-end video, within an Avid or within a Final Cut Pro, for example. Many organizations just decide that they're just going to manage the final version of a video within the DAM rather than the whole entire thing throughout the whole life cycle. Or they might manage a record. So if somebody says, okay, we're going to do a video about this new product, they put a record of that video in the digital asset management system, but they're creating it outside the system, and then when it's done, they upload it as a final asset, and then they can take clips of it, they can use pieces of it, but it's basically already approved at that point. So you have to assess that, and you have to be realistic about what am I going to really manage in the DAM versus outside, and what's really going to be people management versus a real electronic workflow.
Right. And I'll add that's something in terms of workflow that you can certainly get some insight in during the vendor demo stage of a selection process. You know, if you have your workflow mapped out, have the vendors who come in and give demos actually demonstrate your workflow, and likewise use your content if possible, and then you'll get a real picture for if they can handle it or not. Next question, Teresa. Actually, this is a very interesting one. Are there any DAM vendors out there who have the ability to syndicate content externally? And if so, is it more of a portal so that they can actually track where the asset is being used and track KPIs against the asset?
Yes. I guess syndicate is an interesting use of word there, because I guess I wouldn't say so much syndicate, but they have reporting functions essentially, whereby if so I'll use the ad agency as an example. If you're an ad agency and you are putting a whole bunch of logos online, DAM vendors tend to have an internal application where you have, so your internal creative people, the ad agency might be using the DAM, uploading things to it, moving assets through it, using it for workflow. And then there's a whole bunch of external users who use what's called a portal aspect, basically a portal product, but it's not a separate product. It's really a mirror of the internal DAM application that is just open. It's on the other side of the firewall, essentially, and it's open to external users that need to download assets. And the reporting functions within these DAM systems essentially will keep track of what is being used the most. So if you have 20 versions of the same logo, it'll tell you this was the most popular one. And if you want, you can do search results. You can tailor your search results so that the most popular downloaded asset is the one that comes to the top when the external users come to the system. So it's not so much what I would call a syndication scenario as a distribution scenario, whereby those assets are available externally, and the system will track what is downloaded and by whom. And this is, of course, extremely important if you're tracking for rights purposes and monetization purposes. And in an ad agency scenario, you actually charge based on that. So if somebody downloaded it 20 times, you charge them based on that usage.
Great. Okay, one more question. There was actually a couple questions relating to DAM standards. And Teresa, I apologize if this is too specific of a question. You might not have this at the top of your head, but I'm sure it's in the research that you've done. But are any of the larger enterprise digital asset management systems supporting the IBTC extension or plus metadata schemas that you know about that can easily map XMP values?
Yes, many vendors are supporting IBTC standards, and in fact, IBTC and XMP are really the two most frequently supported standards, because they've been around for a really, really long time as a metadata standard. But generally, what you're getting, it's just a set of values that need to be populated. So when they say that, oh, yes, we support IBTC, I mean, it's essentially giving you a structure for you to be able to populate the metadata. Same thing with not all standard support is created equal, is what I'm trying to say. So when a vendor says, yes, we support IBTC, or yes, we support XMP, well, you have to ask how you support it. I mean, essentially, they could say they support it and the structure is there, so that you can fill in the values as needed. But how those values get extracted when they're ingested into the system, how they get managed once the asset is in the system, and how those things are treated when the asset is taken out of the system is what varies, really. So just about every vendor that we cover supports IBTC and XMP at various levels. But I could say, for example, the strongest, just to name one off the top of my head, probably the strongest XMP support comes from Media Beacon. You know, they actually keep all of the metadata embedded in the file within their system, and it's just a very strong tie-in XMP that they have. And that's what I can think of off the top of my head.
Great. Well, I think we're running out of time, and so at this point, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us once again, and thank you, Teresa, for your time today. And as Teresa has mentioned, if you would like to ask more questions, you can follow her on Twitter, or follow the Real Story Group on Twitter, or just send her an email at tregley@realstorygroup.com. Thank you all, and you can expect an email from us, like I said, with the slides in the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you.